Welcome to a sonic revolution born in the heart of New York, Harlem, in the 1920s. This wasn't just a neighborhood, it was the beating heart of a cultural uprising, a living, breathing symphony of black pride, artistry, and resistance. But before we dive into Cotton Club et al., let's step back and understand how Harlem became ground zero for a seismic cultural shift. In the early 1900s, the American South was defined by Jim Crow laws, rigid segregation, disenfranchisement, and daily terror for black citizens. Sharecropping replaced slavery, but the socioeconomic reality was brutally similar. Debt, violence, limited opportunities. Public lynchings and mobs were an everyday threat. World War I offered a strange kind of opening. As labor shortages hit northern factories, company recruiters traveled to southern black communities, promising factory jobs, better pay, safer cities. For many, it was an escape route, the chance at a future, a chance at dignity. Between 1916 and 1970, over 6 million black Southerners left their homes in what became known as the Great Migration. They pushed past state lines and cultural boundaries, seeking education, voting rights, and freedom. Northern cities like Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and New York's Harlem became havens of hope and transformation. Harlem was originally developed in the 1880s as a white suburb, but after the Panic of 1907, an influx of Jewish and Italian residents, and then wave after wave of black families, it rapidly changed. By 1910, 12% of Harlem's population was black. By the 1920s, that number had exploded to 80 to 90%. Housing shortages forced overcrowding, rent gouging, and tension. In response, the community created self-help institutions, black-run banks, newspapers like the Amsterdam News, churches, schools like the Harlem YMCA, and cultural clubs. This planting of community infrastructure was critical. It established Harlem not as a transit point, but as a destination, a place where black intellectuals, artists, and entrepreneurs could build futures, not just jobs. By the early 1920s, Harlem had its own armed guard, the Harlem Redcaps, to protect black-owned venues. Poetry, literature, and visual art flourished. Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Countee Cullen were writing poems and plays. Visual artists like Aaron Douglas were forging new black aesthetics. But music? Music was the most viral. It needed no translation. It traveled through clubs and dances and overflowed into public parks. Between 1920 and 1930, Harlem hosted dozens of speakeasies, rooftop clubs, cellar dives, hotel lounges, covering every price point and crowd. If you wanted music, inspiration, or a sense of belonging, Harlem was the place to be. Now, let's unpack the rise of jazz and why it was so revolutionary. Jazz grew from the syncretism of African and European traditions. The African emphasis on rhythm, call and response, improvisation, mixed with European notation, structure, brass instruments. In 1923, Duke Ellington became bandleader at the Cotton Club, a whites-only club in the heart of Harlem, and began composing pieces like East St. Louis Toodle-Oo and Black and Tan Fantasy. His orchestrations, full of complex harmonies and layered noise, were called jungle music. But for Ellington, it was blackness translated through beauty. Ellington's band toured, recorded, and put black artistry on the map, though segregation meant his audience was often white. But somewhere in those underground vibratos, Harlem still lived. Meanwhile, Louis Armstrong was making a new kind of jazz solo, one that defined individuality. He broke away from collective ensemble playing, turned the solo into personal storytelling. By the late 1920s, Armstrong's innovations, swing, scat singing, rhythmic displacement, were essentially inventing modern jazz. When jazz echoed from radio waves and phonographs, all ears tuned in, and they heard a black man's heart. Bessie Smith was born into poverty in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but found her voice in Harlem. By 1923, she was recording hits like Downhearted Blues and became the highest paid black performer of her time. Her voice was rough and soaring, unvarnished truth about love, hardship, resilience. She made the blues acceptable, even glamorous. She showed that sorrow could sell, and that emotion didn't always need polish. The Savoy Ballroom, the Apollo, Connie's Inn, these were more than music venues. They were arenas where black and white audiences occasionally mixed, where dances evolved and where exploitation and radical empowerment coexisted. In these venues, jazz wasn't just created, it was tested, proven, and celebrated. Harlem's musical revolution didn't stop at jazz. Black churches in Harlem, Bethel, Abyssinian Baptist, sang spirituals rooted in slavery-era worship. Hymns and call-and-response sermons laid groundwork for soul music that would follow in later decades. The emotional immediacy, lyrical depth, all carried forward. Stride piano added thunderous left-hand bass and melodic right hand, improvising over rigid ragtime. James P. Johnson's Carolina Shout and Fats Waller's Handful of Keys created new standards of musical dexterity, fueling dance halls and shuffling feet. Stride was more than showmanship. It was pianistic rebellion. It told white classical audiences to listen carefully. By late 1920s, swing emerged, with horn arrangements, dancers, four-beat grooves. Bands like Fletcher Henderson's started to shape this sound. Harlem's dancers and musicians shaped the culture that would later sweep through the swing era of the 1930s. And jazz clubs, especially informal jam sessions, became the womb of bebop. Small combos at night would push boundaries, playing at faster tempos, dissonant chords, rhythmic unpredictability. Bebop's eventual explosion in the 1940s was sown here. The Harlem Renaissance wasn't a static moment. It echoed through generations. Jazz became a global art form. Coleman Hawkins, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie continued expansion. Film scores and classical composers, Leonard Bernstein, Stravinsky, absorbed jazz influences. Ray Charles, James Brown, Aretha Franklin, all drew on Harlem's blend of gospel and jazz. Sampling, loops, lyricist storytelling, all Harlem-born ideals. Artists like Kendrick Lamar have referenced Harlem's artistic bravery and community speech. Modern figures, Alicia Keys, Robert Glasper, Thundercat, Kamasi Washington, carry this torch forward. Their music sees jazz not as relic, but as living language. Harlem in the 1920s wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a cultural earthquake, one that shook the foundations of music, identity, and power. The rhythms born in black churches, speakeasies, and basements changed what music could be. They changed how we speak through sound. Harlem's Renaissance showed the world. Black voices would not be ignored. They will be heard. If this journey through history moved you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Drop a comment. What surprised you the most? Which artist resonated? I'll see you next time when we dive deeper into another musical revolution, where history meets harmony.